There is a line in space. It has no color. It has no walls. You cannot touch it. You cannot see it. But every single civilization in the known galaxy knows it is there. They have known about it for thousands of years. And not one of them, not one, has ever dared to cross it. The Dominion drew that line. The most powerful alliance of alien species the galaxy had ever seen. They drew it, and they said, nothing crosses this boundary. Nothing comes through. Nothing goes inches. This is the law of the stars. This is the final word. Every species listened. Every species obeyed. Every species understood what happened to those who didn't. Every species except one. Because somewhere in the outer edges of explored space, a small blue planet had produced a species that looked at warning signs and saw suggestions. A species that looked at locked doors and felt curious. A species that looked at the most terrifying line in the history of the galaxy and smiled. Humans didn't cross that line because they were brave. They didn't cross it because they were powerful. They crossed it because that is simply what humans do when someone tells them they cannot. And the galaxy would never be the same again. Let me show you exactly how this happened. The year was 2387 by Earth's calendar. Humanity had been in space for just over 300 years. In galactic terms, that was nothing. That was barely a heartbeat. Most of the species in the galactic community had been traveling between stars for tens of thousands of years. Some had been doing it for millions. Humans were the new kids. Everyone knew it. Everyone felt it. And most of the older species made sure humans felt it too. When Earth first made contact with the galactic community, the welcome was cold. There were no celebrations. There were no warm greetings. The older species simply sent a list of rules. A very long list. Pages and pages of laws, regulations, borders, and boundaries that humanity was expected to follow immediately, without question, without debate. Most of the rules made sense. Don't fire weapons near inhabited planets. Don't interfere with developing civilizations. Don't mine protected star systems. Humans read those rules and agreed without much argument. But there was one rule that stood apart from all the others. It was listed at the very top of the document. It was written in larger text than everything else. It was the first thing any new species received when they joined the galactic community. And it said, in the clearest possible language, that no vessel, no probe, no signal, and no living creature was ever to cross into the region of space known as the Dominion Veil. No explanation was given. No reason was offered. Just the rule. And at the bottom of that rule, a single line that said, violation of this boundary is considered an act of war against all member species of the galactic community. An act of war. Against everyone. At once. Every species that read that rule did the same thing. They looked it up. They studied the maps. They found the location of the Dominion Veil on their star charts, and they made absolutely sure that their ships, their people, and their signals stayed as far away from it as physically possible. Humans read the same rule. They found the same maps. They looked at the same location. And the first thing a human navigator named Commander Sarah Voss said when she saw it was, has anyone actually been there to check what's on the other side? Her crew went very quiet. Her second in command, Lieutenant Marcus Hale, leaned over the navigation console and stared at the glowing boundary line on the star map. It pulsed with a soft red light. A warning. A promise. A threat. No, he said slowly. According to every record we have, no one has ever crossed it. Sarah leaned back in her command chair. She tilted her head slightly. There was a look on her face that her crew had learned to recognize. It was the look she got right before she said something that made the rest of the crew deeply uncomfortable. Interesting, she said quietly. The crew exchanged glances. Nobody said anything, but they all knew. Deep down, in the part of their human brains that had been shaped by thousands of years of curiosity and stubbornness, and sheer relentless boldness, that they were not going home the same way they had left. The UES Resolute, a mid-sized human exploration vessel carrying 43 crew members, continued on its charted path through the outer reaches of explored space. On paper, they were on a routine survey mission. They were mapping asteroid fields near the edge of the galactic community's recognized territory. It was completely routine. Mostly. Sarah Voss pulled up the star charts again that night when most of the crew was sleeping. She sat alone in the dim blue light of the command deck and stared at that pulsing red line on the map. She thought about the rule. She thought about the warning. She thought about the phrase act of war. Then she thought about something her grandfather used to say when she was a little girl growing up in Manchester, England. He used to say, "The scariest doors are always the ones nobody opens." She closed the star charts. She went to sleep. But when she woke up the next morning, she had already made a decision. The Dominion had existed for longer than human civilization had been able to read and write. It was not one species. It was not one government. It was a council, an alliance of the 7 oldest and most powerful civilizations in the galaxy. Together, they controlled more star systems than any human astronomer had ever counted. Their fleets numbered in the hundreds of thousands. Their technology was so advanced that most other species could not even understand the basic principles behind it. They had seen empires rise and fall. They had watched young species discover fire and then discover starships. They had guided, shaped, and when necessary, destroyed entire civilizations that threatened the balance of the galaxy. They were patient. They were ancient. They were absolute. And the Dominion Veil was their greatest secret. No one in the galactic community knew exactly what was inside the veil. The Dominion never explained it. The few times other species had politely asked about it over the centuries, the Dominion representatives would simply repeat the rule. The boundary is closed. The boundary has always been closed. The boundary will always be closed. There is nothing more to discuss. Most species accepted this answer, because when an alliance that controlled half the known galaxy says there is nothing more to discuss, most intelligent beings understand that the conversation is over. On the planet Verath, homeworld of the Verathi, a tall, silver-skinned species with 4 arms and eyes that saw into the ultraviolet spectrum, there was an old saying that had been passed down through generations. It translated roughly into human language as, "The Dominion does not draw lines. The Dominion draws graves." The Verathi had been members of the galactic community for 20,000 years. They had seen 12 different species make aggressive moves against the Dominion in that time. They knew what happened to those species, and so they kept their ships far from the veil, their signals silent near its edges, and their children well educated on the difference between bravery and stupidity. They did not know about Sarah Voss yet. They did not know about the UES Resolute. But they were about to find out. 48 hours after Sarah made her quiet decision in the dark of the command deck, the Resolute completed its official survey of the asteroid field. The data was logged. The mission report was filed. Everything was done properly, professionally, and completely by the book. Then Sarah looked at her navigation officer, young man named Ensign Daniel Park, who was 26 years old and had been in space for less than 2 years. And she said, "Daniel, I want you to plot a course toward the Dominion Veil." The bridge fell completely silent. Daniel turned around in his chair very slowly. He looked at her with an expression that combined professional duty, personal loyalty, and absolute terror in roughly equal parts. "Commander," he said carefully, "the boundary regulations." "I know what the regulations say," Sarah said. She kept her voice calm and even. "Plot the course, Ensign." He plotted the course. because she was his commanding officer, because he trusted her, and because, if he was being completely honest with himself, there was a small but very present part of him that was also extremely curious about what was on the other side of that line. Humans were like that. Every single one of them, somewhere deep inside, was like that. The Resolute turned. Its engines hummed. The star field shifted on the view screen. And ahead of them, still days away at their current speed, that soft red pulse on the navigation map seemed to glow just a little brighter. On the other side of the galaxy, in a chamber carved from the heart of a dead star, 7 ancient beings who had not felt surprise in thousands of years sat around a council table. Above them floated holographic display of the galaxy. And on that display, a tiny blue dot had just changed course. One of the council members, an ancient creature of shifting light and crystallized thought, leaned forward and studied the dot. "A human vessel," it said. Its voice was like grinding stone. "Yes," said another council member. "It is heading toward the veil." "Yes." There was a long silence. "They must not know," said a third council member. The first council member watched the tiny blue dot move slowly but steadily across the map. It did not slow down. It did not change course again. It simply kept moving, steady and certain, toward the one place in the galaxy that nothing was supposed to go. "No," it said finally. "They know." The U.S. Resolute dropped out of faster-than-light travel 300,000 kilometers from the Dominion Veil. Everyone on the bridge went quiet the moment they saw it. On the view screen, the veil looked nothing like the simple red line on their star charts. It was a wall of energy that stretched across space in both directions as far as sensors could detect. It was deep, dark purple at its center, fading to electric blue at its edges. It pulsed slowly, like something breathing. It looked ancient. It looked alive. It looked like the kind of thing that had been placed there not just to keep things out, but to warn them. A last warning before something very final happened. "That is," Lieutenant Hale started. "Yeah," said Ensign Park. "It's Hale tried again." "I know," said Sarah. She leaned forward in her chair and studied it. Every sensor on the Resolute was running at full capacity, feeding data to the ship's systems. The veil registered as an artificial energy field. Ancient, incredibly dense, maintained by a power source that their systems could not locate or identify. It had been active, their computers estimated, for at least 40,000 years. 40,000 years. Continuously powered, continuously maintained, by something on the other side. "Commander," said the ship's communications officer, Lieutenant Yuki Tanaka, "I'm picking up a signal. It's coming from the veil itself. It's on every frequency simultaneously." She paused. "It's a warning message, translated into every language in the galactic community database." "How many languages is that?" Sarah asked. 472, Yuki said. Sarah nodded slowly. "What does it say?" "It says, you have reached the boundary of the Dominion Veil. Turn back immediately. Crossing this boundary is forbidden. This is your only warning." Sarah absorbed this. Then she asked, "Is there a human language translation?" Yuki checked. "No." Sarah almost smiled. "So they hadn't gotten to us yet." "Commander," said Marcus Hale, and his voice was very serious now, "we need to talk about this. The signal itself proves the Dominion knows we're here. They know a human ship is at the boundary. Whatever we do next, we cannot pretend we didn't know about the warning." "I'm not pretending anything," Sarah said. She stood up from her command chair and walked slowly to the center of the bridge, closer to the view screen. She looked at that pulsing purple wall of energy, and she thought very carefully. Then she said, "I want a full science team on sensors. I want to know everything our systems can tell us about what is on the other side of that field. I want to know if there are life signs. I want to know if there are structures. I want to know if there is anything in there that could explain why the most powerful force in the galaxy has been guarding this place for 40,000 years. The science team got to work. What they found changed everything. Behind the veil, their deep-range sensors were picking up something extraordinary. There were planets, dozens of them, and on those planets, there were cities, and in those cities, there were life signs, millions of them, hundreds of millions, living, breathing, moving creatures who had been locked inside the Dominion Veil for, their computer systems estimated, at least 30,000 years. Someone had not kept the galaxy out of the veil. Someone had locked an entire civilization inside it. The silence on the bridge of the Resolute was the kind of silence that happens when people realize that the story they thought they understood was completely different from the actual truth. "They're prisoners," Ensign Park said. His voice was barely above a whisper. No one disagreed with him. Sarah Voss stood very still. She looked at the data on the screen. She looked at the energy wall. She looked at the hundreds of millions of life signs trapped behind it. She thought about the Dominion. She thought about 40,000 years of silence and locked doors and threats dressed up as rules. She thought about what her grandfather always said about scary doors. "Yuki," she said, "open a channel. All frequencies, directed toward those life signs on the other side." Yuki's hands hesitated over a console. "Commander, if the Dominion is monitoring." "They already know we're here," Sarah said simply. "Open the channel." The channel opened. Sarah looked at the view screen. She took one breath. Then she spoke. "This is Commander Sarah Voss of the United Earth ship Resolute. We are a human vessel from the planet Earth. We can see your cities. We can see your people. We don't know who you are yet, but we want you to know we are here, and we are listening." For a long moment, there was nothing. Then, from behind 40,000 years of forced silence, a voice came back. It was shaking. It was overwhelmed. It was a voice that had never in its life expected to hear another voice come from outside the veil. It said, in a language that the Resolute's translation systems worked desperately to decode, You can hear us. You are real. You are outside." Sarah felt something tighten in her chest. "Yes," she said. "We're real. We're outside. We can hear you." Another pause. And then, from that voice behind the veil, came a sound that needed no translation at all. It was the sound of someone crying. Within 6 hours of that first transmission, the Dominion responded. Not with a message, not with a warning, with ships. 17 Dominion warships dropped out of faster-than-light travel in a tight formation around the UES Resolute. Each one was bigger than anything humanity had ever built. The smallest of the 17 was 3 times the size of the Resolute. The largest was the size of a small moon. They surrounded the human ship completely. Every weapon system on every vessel was powered up and pointed directly at the Resolute. On the bridge, the crew of the Resolute did various things in response to this development. Some of them grabbed their consoles. Some of them stopped breathing for a moment. Ensign Park made a sound that he would later describe as a professional and controlled expression of tactical concern, but which everyone else on the bridge would describe as a fairly loud gasp. Sarah Voss sat in her command chair, looked at 17 warships surrounding her vessel on the view screen, and said, "Yuki, are they hailing us?" "Yes, Commander. All channels. Very insistently." "Put them through." The view screen shifted. A Dominion commander appeared. It was one of the crystalline species. Its body looked like a massive moving prism. refracting the light around it into fractured rainbows. Its voice, when it spoke, resonated on frequencies that made the metal walls of the bridge hum. "Human vessel," it said. The translation was immediate and precise, which told Sarah that the Dominion had been studying human languages for quite some time. "You are in violation of the most fundamental law of the galactic community. You will power down all engines and all communication systems. You will submit to immediate escort back to human-controlled space. You will never return to this boundary. These terms are not negotiable." Sarah looked at the commander on the screen. She took a measured breath. "With respect," she said, "I have some questions first." The Dominion commander was silent for exactly 3 seconds. It was, apparently, processing the fact that a representative of a 300-year-old spacefaring civilization had just responded to 17 warships with the words, "I have some questions first." "You are not in a position to ask questions," it said. "Maybe not," Sarah agreed. "But I'm going to anyway. Who are the people behind the veil? Why are they there? How long have they been locked inside? And why has the galactic community been told that the veil exists to keep things out, when our sensor data clearly shows it was designed to keep something in?" Another silence. Longer this time. On the screen, something shifted in the Dominion commander's crystalline body. A change in the refraction of light through its form. Sarah did not know enough about this species to read their body language. But something had changed. "Stand by," the commander said. The channel cut out. Marcus Hale appeared at Sarah's side. "They're conferring," he said quietly. "Long-range communication. They're talking to someone further away. Higher up." "The council," Sarah said. "Probably." "Good," she said. "That means they're worried. Or that they're getting permission to destroy us." "Also possible," Sarah admitted. For 11 minutes, the 17 Dominion warships held their position around the Resolute. Every weapon still aimed. Every system still powered. The crew of the Resolute sat and waited in the most uncomfortable 11 minutes most of them had ever experienced. Then the channel opened again. But it was not the Dominion commander who appeared on the screen. It was one of the council members, one of the 7 oldest beings in the galaxy. It was the creature of shifting light that had watched the tiny blue dot on its map and said they know. It looked at Sarah Voss for a long moment. It seemed to be studying her, taking her measure in some way that humans could not fully perceive. "You found them," it said. Its voice was immense, old beyond description. "Yes," Sarah said. "You spoke to them?" "Yes." "You know what they are now? What they were? What the Dominion did?" Sarah held the ancient being's gaze. "I have a pretty good idea," she said. The council member was silent, and then it said something that no human had ever expected to hear from the oldest and most powerful governing body in the galaxy. It said, "We have been waiting for someone to find them for a very long time." The bridge of the Resolute went absolutely still. "The council is divided," the ancient being continued. "It has been divided for thousands of years. There are those among us who believe what was done to the Cavith, the people behind the veil, was just. There are those of us who have never believed that. But we did not have the power to change it alone. The veil was built by a majority decision. It can only be unmade by an outside force, a pause. The rules state that any species that reaches the veil and does not turn back has the right to petition for a full council hearing." Sarah's eyes narrowed slightly. "And how many species have reached the veil and not turned back?" The ancient being looked at her with what might, in a human, have been the earliest beginning of something like respect. "Before today," it said. "None." The council hearing took place on the Dominion's central station, a structure so large it had its own gravity, its own weather systems, and its own internal star to provide light and heat to the thousands of beings who lived and worked inside it. Sarah Voss walked into that hearing chamber with 3 members of her crew beside her. She wore her standard Earth Fleet uniform. She had no special armor, no ceremonial clothing, no ancient title or powerful ancestry to draw on. She was a commander from a small planet that had been in space for 300 years, walking into a room full of beings that had been shaping the galaxy for longer than humanity had existed. She was not nervous. Or rather, she was, but she had decided that nervousness was not relevant to what needed to happen in this room. The chamber was enormous, curved walls that stretched upward into shadow, hundreds of Dominion observers in the galleries above. The 7 council members seated in a semicircle ahead of her, each one a different species, each one ancient and powerful, and fully aware that this moment was going to matter. The youngest of the council members, young being a relative term, as it had only been alive for 8,000 years, spoke first. It was one of those who believed the imprisonment of the Caveth had been just. Its voice was sharp and dismissive. "The human has no standing here," it said. She crossed the boundary in violation of law. She should be escorted from this chamber and returned to human space with a formal warning. "The rules disagree with you," said the council member of shifting light. She reached the veil. She did not turn back. She has standing. "The rules were written for civilizations of consequence," said the younger council member. "Humans have been in space for 3 centuries. They are children. Their opinion on a matter of this gravity is meaningless." Sarah had been warned that this argument would come. She had spent the 3 days of travel to the central station preparing for it. She had read everything available in the galactic community's open records about the Caveth and the history of the Veil. She had talked to the Caveth communications officer on the other side of the barrier every day, learning everything she could about who they were and what had happened to them. And she had prepared exactly one response to the argument that human opinion was meaningless. She stepped forward. She addressed not the council member who had dismissed her, but the full chamber. "You're right," she said. "We're young. 300 years in space is nothing. We don't have the history, the technology, or the power that most of the civilizations in this room have. And I'm not going to stand here and pretend otherwise." She paused. "But I want to ask this council one question. One question, and I want an honest answer." The chamber was quiet. "The Caveth have been behind that wall for 30,000 years, Sarah said. In those 30,000 years, how many species in the galactic community went to the Veil to check if what was done there was still right? How many of you sent ships? How many of you asked questions? How many of you did anything at all?" No answer. "I've read the records," Sarah continued. "I know the answer is 0. Nobody went. Nobody checked. Nobody asked. For 30,000 years, everyone in the galactic community accepted that the line was there and turned around and went home." She looked directly at the council. "We didn't. Not because we're brave. Not because we're powerful. Because we are exactly what you said we are. We are young. We don't know yet that you're supposed to accept lines like that without asking why they were drawn." The chamber was perfectly silent. "The Caveth did not do what you accused them of," Sarah continued, her voice steady. "Your own historical records show contradictions in the original case. Your own censor archives show that the evidence presented at their trial was incomplete. Your own scientists have published, in closed Dominion journals, that humans weren't supposed to access. Doubts about the original verdict." She looked at each council member in turn. "You didn't need a young species to tell you this was wrong. You needed a young species to walk up to the door that everyone else was too experienced, too wise, and too careful to open." The council member of shifting light rose from its seat. "I move," it said, and its voice filled every corner of the vast chamber, "for a full review of the Caveth imprisonment. Under Dominion law, Article 7, Emergency Review Clause. Seconded by any council member who believes the evidence merits examination." 3 other council members rose. 4 of 7, a majority. The youngest council member made a sound that translated roughly as outrage. 2 others sat in silence that looked, to Sarah's reading of it, very much like relief. The review took 4 months. Sarah and her crew stayed. They gave testimony. They shared their sensor data. They provided the Cavith communications officer's testimony, recorded through the veil. They answered every question, challenged every dismissal, and refused to go home until the process was finished. When the final decision came, it was read by the council member of Shifting Light, in a chamber that had gone so quiet even the station's internal systems seemed to hold their breath. The imprisonment of the Cavith is hereby declared unjust. The Dominion Veil will be deactivated within 30 days. The Cavith will be welcomed as full members of the galactic community. All records of their civilization, their culture, and their history will be restored. This decision is final and irreversible. The moment the veil came down, 30 days later, the UES Resolute was there. Sarah Voss stood on the bridge and watched the purple energy wall dissolve and fade and disappear into nothing, until all that was left was open space and 2 civilizations on either side of where a line used to be. The first Cavith ship through the gap was small, old. It had clearly been maintained through 30,000 years of imprisonment with whatever resources its people had been able to gather. It was not impressive by any galactic standard. It flew straight to the Resolute and stopped. A voice came through on the channel. It was the same voice Sarah had first heard crying on the other side of the veil. "Commander Voss," it said. "I'm here," Sarah said. "You came back. You stayed." "Of course," she said simply. A pause. "Why?" the voice asked. "You had no reason. Your people had no history with us. You could have turned back at the line. Everyone else did." Sarah looked at the open stars where the veil used to be. She thought about what she was going to say. She thought about all the careful, diplomatic, political answers she could give. Then she gave the honest one. "We didn't turn back," she said, "because someone drew a line and told us we couldn't cross it." She could hear, even through the translation system, that the Cavith voice was smiling. "That," it said softly, "is the most human thing I have ever heard. Here is the part that nobody talks about." After the veil came down, the Dominion conducted a full investigation into the original records. What they found, buried deep in 30,000-year-old files, was something extraordinary. The original case against the Cavith had not been built on evidence. It had been built on fear. The Cavith had been developing a technology, a way to communicate across all known space simultaneously, that would have made every species in the galaxy equal. No gatekeepers, no councils, no ancient civilizations controlling the flow of information and power. The Dominion had not imprisoned the Cavith because they were dangerous. They had imprisoned them because they were threatening to level playing field that the powerful had spent thousands of years tilting in their favor. And a human ship had stumbled into it by accident. Or maybe not entirely by accident. Because Sarah Voss had grown up on a planet that had its own long history of powerful forces drawing lines and telling people to stay behind them. She had grown up knowing, in her bones, that the most important lines were often the ones built to protect the powerful from the powerless, not the other way around. The galaxy had needed someone who knew that. It had needed someone young enough to still believe it mattered. If this opened your eyes, keep watching. Because the universe is full of lines, and humanity is just getting started. A line was drawn. The most powerful force in the galaxy backed it up with 40,000 years of silence and 17 warships. Every civilization in the known galaxy had walked up to that line and turned around. And then a human ship showed up, and a commander from Manchester asked one question that changed everything. Has anyone actually been there to check what's on the other side? 30,000 years of injustice ended not because of ancient wisdom or superior firepower. It ended because humans are fundamentally, stubbornly, beautifully incapable of accepting a closed door without wanting to know what is behind it. That is the most human thing in the universe. If you loved this story, hit that like button right now. It helps more people find stories like this one. Subscribe to HFYSCIF. So you never miss the next time humanity reminds the universe exactly what we are made of. And if you want to go deeper, the next video on this channel is going to show you another story where the galaxy learned, the hard way, never to underestimate the species from the small blue planet. Now here is the question I want you to answer in the comments below. If you were Commander Sarah Voss and you saw that line on the map, would you cross it? Tell me honestly, yes or no, and why? I read every single comment, and I want to know what you think. See you in the next one.